Oh, we're not clapping together. Oh, I that up.
It was good enough.
Close
She'll
enough.
use it.
It's a good start.
That's like a shotgun start.
Exactly. That was like a false start.
All right, everyone take a sip.
Yeah, all right, Chug, should we do these as shooters?
Did you guys see what I picked? I picked it solely based on the name of the beer, which is Easy Answers. I thought that was appropriate for
Easy answers.
energy versus climate.
I like that because
My impression is there's so many varieties of beer right now that the honest truth is when I go into shop, I just go by the name because there's always another name 6 months later, so I have no idea.
I'm a real sucker for cosmetics on cans.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this can and it's got these semicircles and these concentric semicircles too in different colors. And I don't know what's it saying, but that's itself is not an easy answer.
The little blurb about it too says answers are seldom easy. So I feel like it could be like the energy versus climate official beer.
There we go. Okay.
And I like the fact that it's relatively low alcohol because as I get older, I actually don't want 7% beer.
And so just to be clear, EBC takes no corporate sponsorship money except from the Annex Ale project for Easy Answers, available at all fine beer stores everywhere. So smooth, so hoppy, so easy.
Yeah!
All right, so today is a very special EBC day because while we've done recordings without guests, we've done recordings following kind of different formats like we did with our careers episode. This is the first recording that we've done in person in Sarah's basement sewing room and for a very special topic too. And the topic being one that we acknowledge we don't know that much about. And the topic is cryptocurrency, and given that it's EBC, its implications for climate and energy. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so.
You left out the beer.
Oh, that's right. I left out the most important thing after I'd give the plug for Easy Answers by the Annex Ale project, that we decided to do this in person, and we're going to do something that you're not supposed to do, and that is mix drinking with media. We are drinking and recording at the same time. Children, please don't do this at home.
I have to say it's really disorienting to see you guys like in person and not on my Zoom screen.
Yes, it's a little
like
shocking to actually be in a small room with other human beings recording this.
That's right. I keep raising my finger to minimize David's face, but it just won't minimize. It's just hanging there like a big bulb.
Thank you, Ed.
All right. I say that with the grace of affection, of course. Yeah.
Oh, and we're solar powered too. I think the rooftop solar that I have, despite David's protests, is just hanging on. We're starting late, so it's starting to be less than what we're using. But.
We are solar powered, and our emissions are avoided at a low cost of $350 per ton.
Rock on.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So we're doing this episode on crypto. What does it mean for energy and climate? We don't really know much about the topic. Sarah's done some calculations, which she's going to walk us through. We're going to just talk about general implications, the specific Alberta experience with crypto, and we're going to then sort of zoom out and look at the blockchain more broadly. What are the advantages to the blockchain? And I think it's safe to say we're all coming in a little bit skeptical, but two of us in this room are crypto investors.
And I can say for certain that one of us is a loser. So Ed had strongly encouraged that to kind of loosen this whole episode up, we really ought to become crypto investors. So I did become a crypto investor, and as of now, I've lost $56.
And remember I told you about that the Paul Krugman quote in the New York Times? And I'm having a look at it here. It's basically he said crypto is there's growing evidence that the risks of crypto are falling disproportionately on people who don't know what they're getting into. So I'm still ahead on my Bitcoin investment from 3 weeks ago. Now, full disclosure, when I checked it 2 days ago, I was 37 cents ahead, but I'm still in the money, David.
Well, I'm $56 down, and I blame you, but I also plead guilty, according to Krugman, that I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think the real wise woman here is the wise woman, right?
I just stayed out of this entirely.
Yeah, but you're missing. You could grab that tiger by the tail, Sarah, and go for a ride. And if you time it right, like I did, you're 37 cents ahead. If you don't know what you're doing, like David, then you're $50 in the hole. It's all about timing and watching the markets every minute of every day, as I do now, compulsively.
I'm just excited that I locked in my electricity rate in the fall, so I didn't have a big bill. I think that's my version of like watching the market.
And
I think the fact that you like the lock-in shows that your psychological outlook is actually small c conservative, because you like to minimize risks, even though your social outlook is actually liberal.
Well, so I had been on a floating rate until just now, and I think it's just because for whatever reason the fixed rates that the distributors were offering were really good compared to what was widely expected and what ended up happening with rates.
I'll chip in to say that I feel like teaching courses at the Kennedy School at Harvard, I've had at least 2 or 3 students who just really seem to believe that somehow carbon credits on the blockchain are just going to make climate policy easy. And it really does feel like these people are talking about like alien sex, like, because I think I actually do understand the core of the blockchain fine, but I have no idea. I just don't believe at all that it's going to be useful in the way they think it is. But these are smart people who've thought about it. So that's why I think it makes a good show.
Oh, well, and when we get into it, I want to get to a crypto site that I became aware of. So I have many people in my circle who are crypto investors, and I have some who I would call crypto enthusiasts. And sometimes I get shared crypto sites, and I'm asked, well, what do you think? And I provide my response to them. And what I see, at least on some of them, it's pure hype. And I want to get to some of the pure energy climate-related hype that I've been seeing. But at a high level, I went to one of these sites, and maybe this is just a place where we could start. I see things like, and this is from a crypto site, how to safely earn investment yields 67 times higher by opting out of the legacy financial system. The new gold rush, how today's cryptocurrency market is like the California gold rush. That's a positive association. Yeah, like you're using it as a positive association. And how you can turn the frenzy into potentially life-changing profits. How to potentially bank returns as high to 50 to 100x. Without being a professional investor, like David Keefe, without needing a huge starting sum, and without spending all day researching projects. So when I see these, and these are like seminar topics. So then I get, going back to Krugman's op-ed, I think, gee, some of this comes across as pure hype, preying upon investors who really don't know what they're doing.
So why don't we get to Sarah's calculation, because it does kind of give you, Sarah, I like the fact you actually produced a number, 3.6 cents a kilowatt hour, as I recall.
36 cents.
36 cents a kilowatt hour, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us your calculation, because it gives you insight into what's driving this. Whether or not it makes sense, it gives you insight into what's driving it.
Yeah, so what I did was, and I hope this is right, we'll have to do some double checking, I guess, but I looked at basically what is the value of the Bitcoin on a per kilowatt hour basis of the energy that it costs to mine. And so I did that by taking these numbers. This one I got from the New York Times about the amount of kilowatt hours that it takes to mine Bitcoin. They actually, for whatever reason, gave it in terms of yearly household consumption in the US. So I guess that gives a sense of sort of how much that is. So mining one Bitcoin uses somewhere between 9 and 13 years worth of a household's electricity consumption. So that ends you up somewhere in the range of about 100,000 kilowatt hours. And one Bitcoin, as of when I recently looked, was worth about 50,000 Canadian dollars. And so basically what that says is that you get 36 cents worth of Bitcoin per per every kilowatt hour of electricity that you use to mine that. How does that compare to the cost of electricity, right? So that's the first sort of question mark. So, I mean, cost of electricity, as we were just talking about, has gone up recently in Alberta, although it's actually trending back towards sort of where it has been in a longer term average in some ways. But it's something like, we'll call it 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So, it's a little bit more, the value, the 30 cents of the value of Bitcoin compared to the kilowatt hour. One other calculation, and then I have one kind of reflection on that. I just wanted to do a comparison of how that compares with Alberta's power usage today and what we do with that power and what our GDP is. This is not a perfect calculation, obviously, because we have energy that goes into our economy in the form of natural gas and oil that's not captured in this electricity calculation. But so maybe someone wants to do that more complete calculation. But in any case, I came up with, basically if we took all the power that we produce in Alberta, we could mine somewhere on the order of 500,000 Bitcoins per year. If we directed that all to Bitcoin mining, that would be, again, at that certain current rate, somewhere like $35 billion. Whereas Alberta's GDP is about 10 times that, around 335 billion. So, certainly a energy intensive. I mean, the fact that the cost is, not wildly different than the cost of electricity, I think in some ways is maybe not surprising. I guess it gives you some question about how much that value can grow. But it actually also reminded me of a paper that I found really interesting that was looking at the long-term cost of all kinds of different minerals and things that we mine from the earth. And actually the energy cost of extracting those was a big portion of that cost, right? So essentially, it's sort of, I don't know, I guess it made some intuitive sense to me that this is sort of tied to the energy that goes into it in some way. Maybe it varies more as the price varies, but yeah, there you go. And I guess I still am not convinced that that's the most useful thing that you can use that energy for. But
not convinced. I mean, maybe just to say the basics. So this is the way I understand the basics. What is this Bitcoin thing? So the core of it is the blockchain is a distributed ledger. So the idea is you have one accounting ledger that is in a sense public. Everybody can see it, and it's not owned on any one computer. It's distributed copies around many different computers, and the copies are verified by a computational process. And the business of Bitcoin mining is tying together two things. You want to manage the work of verification, and you also want to find a way. So you want to encourage people to do the verification that says that all the different distributed ledgers are the same, and as a reward for that, you're going to pay them by expanding the money supply, by creating new Bitcoins. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's actually not an accident that at this point the thing is expanded, so the marginal cost of making Bitcoin electricity is not that far off the cost of electricity, because computer hardware is so cheap, that's where it goes. What isn't clear to me is how hard it would be to come up with something that had the benefits of Bitcoin to finance, forgetting the bigger questions, but just we assume that a distributed ledger not owned by any government currency is a good thing. Can you do that and not have this big computational cost for, not have this mining trick? And I think the answer is there are ways to do that.
Well, and this begs the question of what's the highest end use of electrons? And given we know with climate models that we need to increasingly electrify mobility and heat, and that's going to require more electrons, not less electrons. So electrons already, they're a rare and valuable commodity. They're going to become increasingly so as we have to bring on new electricity supply. And relative to the benefits, the societal benefits or disbenefits from anything that's using those electrons. And we can talk about mining. You can make an argument that mining justifies the benefits that we get justifies the environmental costs, or oil and gas. You can make the counter argument. I don't think we've really had that argument with crypto yet. Now with blockchain, so my understanding of the benefits of it, there are very clear security benefits, very clear instant traceability benefits, speed and efficiency benefits. So there's lots there with the blockchain that if you're a company or if you're the US government or you're the Ukrainian government right now, that you want to use the blockchain for those benefits. So yes, when it comes to crypto and you apply those benefits essentially to, currency, then do those same benefits exist? And that's where it gets a lot muddier to me. Now, when I go and listen to the crypto enthusiasts, they argue very passionately in favor of decentralization of currency and against fiat currency, and that the centralized banks are the ones who are basically suppressing a lot of wealth, and by extension, they're suppressing freedom, and by extension, they're suppressing peace. And then it goes, a couple steps into the harder to defend and beyond reason. That's the one I will acknowledge on this episode. I just don't understand. When I look at it and I poke at it a bit, it seems a lot like hype, but I frankly just don't understand those overall societal benefits.
I mean, I think this comes down to stuff that none of the three of us, I think, know enough about, which is like, how useful is government monetary policy to managing out economic social cycles in capitalism, where I don't think any of us are experts. But I think it's fair to say, and it's obviously pretty relevant to talk about today, because the Fed is just raising rates, that societies have got better at managing business cycles, and that the system of central banks' goal is to manage business cycles in an intelligent way that is overall somehow a public good. And it's not clear to me the world would be better if there was no way for governments to do that.
The thing that I think we are, more experts on and could also talk a little bit more about is the environmental impact of this mining and the credibility of claims around, ways to do it that's more green or more, zero impact or whatever you want to call it. And I think those range from really the most questionable that I've seen, almost laughable, is the idea that they are that this Bitcoin mining is good because it's making use of otherwise stranded assets, as in, we would just keep this natural gas in the ground and not burn it if it weren't for the fact that we were, mining this Bitcoin, which from a climate perspective, that's clearly the better option. Where I think that it gets murkier is this question of, well, what if you are going to actually just power your Bitcoin mining purely by renewable energy? Where, again, I think it kind of comes back to one of the discussions that we've had around offsets even, and this concept of what's the baseline that you're measuring against. But I think from my perspective, especially in a world where we haven't decarbonized our electricity supply, we need to decarbonize the supply that we have, we need to build out, more of it, that even if the Bitcoin is being done with electricity that is renewable, that's actually still going to be, a net negative impact from a climate perspective versus not doing it at all, because, that's electricity that you could, in theory, be using to power something else that is currently using more emissions.
So here's one that I pulled up because, again, I went to the sort of crypto enthusiast website that had all these seminars. And one,
it obviously worked for you. You made money. I did not go to the crypto enthusiast website and I lost money. So that says go to the crypto enthusiast website.
I want to correct the record. I said I was 37 cents in the black. I remind myself I'm 87 cents in the black. I'm close to 3 times, well, 2.5 times. I'm way more in the black than I thought I was. So this one was a hoot. So here was, and I went to a site, and I'm happy to share this link, around essentially the benefits of crypto in bringing more renewable electricity on the grid. In the U.S., so see if you can spot the flaw in this logic, to the two of you, university professors. In the U.S.
Whoa. I think we should razz him about the idea that he thinks electrons are like a supply. Like, both of us, when Ed was talking electrons, the thought bubble over both our heads are, Ed's an idiot. He has no idea how electricity actually works. It has nothing to do with these electrons moving a long way or some shortage of them.
Hey, I flip a switch. I know the electrons are doing something to power a light. And what I want is a big wind turbine on my front lawn, because that's what I think we should do. I want green electrons. I don't want those sloshy grid electrons. So
I'll go in your house and paint them green for you.
Okay. By the way, I knew someone who worked for a big renewable developer, and this is 20 years ago, and he complained about people calling and saying, I got a 42 front lawn, and can I erect a wind turbine? So what did I do at least once a year? I would call and I'd muffle my voice. I'm like, I would like to put up a wind turbine on my front lawn. Do you guys do that? Okay, to this quote, spot the flaw in the logic. In the U.S., we generate 4 terawatt hours of electricity. we lose 200 to 300 gigawatts of electricity per hour just through friction in the transmission lines. All of the Bitcoin miners in the US use less than 200 gigawatts of electricity. So we're just using energy that otherwise would be wasted.
I would also say that, of course, the Bitcoin miners are not using the energy that gets lost in resistance on the transmission lines, but
we use the line loss. Like, it's just so
that's up there with we use the energy that's trapped otherwise and stranded.
Yeah. It's almost as good as going to the societal benefits, where I see statements like how your freedom of speech is under attack by Silicon Valley Marxists, and how one cryptocurrency company is fighting to restore your God-given rights.
So just to tell you how I have, I believe, 2 students, at least one who went to work for Plantier Technologies, and his job was to develop the idea that they would have modules in shipping crates that would do Bitcoin mining and then be connected to stranded gas assets, which I think is a way to make money. It's not a bad way to make money, but man, what a waste of brain power. To be clear, I told this gentleman my view.
Yeah.
And also, I want to be clear too, if we were living in a world where we were not yet developing renewable energy at scale, and we thought that Bitcoin could provide a demand that would enable that sector to grow, right? Then I think you would have a legitimate claim to sort of a positive environmental impact there. So, I think there's at least I can see from that perspective, from the current state to where, one might think that, but I just don't think that that's the world we're living in now, right? It's not that we have, too much renewable energy projects out there that are waiting for uses for that electricity.
Yeah. I guess just because we got to do it, we have to body check the current Alberta government. So I've lost track, but isn't it right that they floated this as an idea of a way for Alberta to make money?
They are certainly encouraging the crypto industry to come to Alberta. And I think there's, certainly from the perspective of using some of this, potentially otherwise stranded gas assets, I think there's an economic opportunity there. Again, I think from a climate perspective, it's not the right way to go. And I think in general, it certainly seems like a relatively volatile market as well too. So, to jump straight into something like that, I have a big question mark about whether that's the right way to go.
And I want to give a shout out to research that an investigative journalist named Jody McPherson did for the Energy Mix. And full disclosure, she talked to me about this story. You had a Bitcoin miner that essentially started powering up a couple derelict gas wells for electricity self-supply. And it's not a trivial amount. It was like a 10 megawatt site to basically power a Bitcoin mining operation. And they did this without AUC approval, Alberta Utilities Commission approval. So a solidly non-trivial amount of electricity output without going through proper approvals. And she asked me about this. And so let's, on the surface, sure, you can't just fire up these gas wells, use it to generate electricity, and not go through proper approvals. But then it did prompt this question of, well, what's the best use of the electricity that we generate, especially if you're coming from gas-fired electricity without any kind of mitigation? Is this the industry that we want coming? And then what are those benefits and disbenefits? And I think what we're saying on today's show is the disbenefits we're clearer on. The benefits, when you discount the hype statements, are still pretty fuzzy.
Yeah, and I wanted to say also, so Sara Rieger at CBC News, I think also kind of had a role in unearthing this story. I had actually talked to her about it. And one of the other parts of that I thought was interesting about it is that this really came to light, after it was residents that were in a wealthy estate community that was near one of these generators, right? And I think that's also, kind of coming back to this topic of environmental justice that we've touched on sometimes. I think it's interesting that it only became an issue when an affluent community was impacted by the noise from these natural gas generators, right? And we're able to get into the process in the right place and get the right people to investigate and discover this as well too. So,
man. Yeah.
So I want to pivot to trying to find some good in all this. I think it's pretty clear that none of us, we may all be ignorant, or not may, we are all pretty ignorant, but none of us thinks that Bitcoin mining is a good way for Alberta to get rich or necessarily that useful. But I do think that the idea of distributed ledgers, and more generally the idea of new software tools to organize decentralized organizations, I think is an exciting new thing in democracy, and there's a bunch of ways it could be useful. So I'd like to maybe start with the thing that these students have said to me, that somehow it would be really useful for carbon markets. So the idea is somehow it could allow somebody who has some way to save carbon to be able to make an exchange that was guaranteed and outside government to somebody else who wants to pay for an offset. That I really don't get, because the hard part isn't verifying the exchange on the blockchain. The hard part is verifying the exchange in reality in a way that's quite different from money. But I guess I'd like to hear both of you on that, and then I'd like to go to some ways that I really think that this sort of broader set of technologies similar to blockchain actually might play important roles.
For sure. Now, before we go there, can I ask both of you a question? Because we're worried about the electricity draw coming from Bitcoin mining or crypto generally. So looking at Jody's article, she says that Bitcoin miners, and I don't know if this is a proxy for crypto miners, just Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin. Bitcoin miners around the world use 127 terawatt hours of electricity. They used that last year. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Does that matter? Is this like a tempest in a teapot in terms of electricity consumption?
I mean, I think it's important to say that IT overall, like if you look at the total energy footprint of all ITC, meaning all the server farms, the network systems, the entire thing, it's a few percent of electricity. And you can find articles that show it growing up exponentially, but I think there are deep reasons why it's not going to do that. It hasn't done that. So because there's so much money flowing through the IT business, and there's a bunch of, to be blunt, Silicon Valley liberals who care a lot about climate, which is great. They focus on their local business. There's a way, and because IT is so transformative in all of our lives, we tend to think of it as really important, but it just, all of IT, let alone the tiny, tiny bit of it that's crypto, just isn't that big a footprint.
Yeah, I think it's always hard. I feel like this is another version of the same question of, does this country matter? Does that country matter? And almost every sector, of course, in the climate space is small in its overall footprint, right? With the exception of, some really big industrial sectors and things like that. So, if you ask the question of, is crypto or, emissions from any other thing going to make or break, climate? The answer is on its own, no. But of course, if we are going to get to net zero globally, then, we need to do something about all of the emissions that we have. And so, I guess where that leads me to with the crypto thing is, again, yeah, it's not, this is not going to be what makes or breaks climate, right? That would be too strong of a statement. But it's certainly not the right direction to be moving in terms of what we're doing with electricity.
Yeah, but I want to go more generally. I think I'm skeptical about the IT industry generally thinking that much effort about managing their carbon footprint, because the fact is it's almost all electricity, and it's pretty clear this is really about decarbonizing electricity. It's not like we're not going to go back to the Babbage engine and have like a direct mechanical drive shaft between a wind turbine and a computer. That would be a non-electrically, there's no version of that that's going to make sense. So this is really, it just automatically gets decarbonized when electricity gets decarbonized. And I think there may be ways in which very high computational loads are so valuable to society, you really do get the overall energy in ITC going up a lot. But I'm kind of skeptical. I think there's some deep reasons it's self-limiting.
And so one example is Microsoft, which may not be the biggest IT company in the world now, compared to Google or Apple. I don't know. But I think it's like 10 million tons per year, which sounds like a big number. Now, we're producing 52 billion tons of CO2 per year. It's equivalent to one coal-fired electricity plant, say here in Alberta, for its global operations. That's pretty small. Yeah. So when Microsoft says, we're going to go back and we are going to through carbon removal technologies, try to negate not just our annual emissions, but our historic emissions, it's dealing with a pretty small number.
Exactly. And that might be useful if it drives some technological change. I think the point is that so I agree with you, Sarah. Well said that each sector individually isn't that big. But I think the point is there are some sectors that are particularly different or hard. So however we're going to decarbonize aviation or heavy transport or cement, we really need to figure out something different to do. But something that just, from the point of view of the energy system, a generic electricity client, I think we don't really need to pay that much policy attention to. We just need to figure out how to decarbonize electricity.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe the role of the tech companies is less trying to get them to drive down their emissions. If their emissions are relatively small, and looking at what they're doing, like what the tech companies, the Stripes, the Shopifys, and the Microsofts right now, is they're creating future carbon markets. They're basically investing at exorbitant amounts, $600 to $700 a ton, to buy frontier carbon offsets from technologies like carbon removal. Maybe we just say, hey, you're 40% margin businesses. We don't want you to worry too much about your own emissions. We'll take care of that as we clean up electricity, but we want you to spend ungodly sums on buying carbon credits to try to create markets for this. Like, use that wealth to try to drive the next round of low carbon technologies.
Yeah, and to be clear, so I mean, when we talk about that for ITC, I think they deserve credit for doing what I sort of mentioned that, maybe people would want Bitcoin to do, which is, create this market for renewable energy that exists now. There was a role that, the Microsofts and Apples and others played in corporate procurement, right? And that did actually, I think, move the needle on deployment of renewables in a meaningful way. So yeah, I don't think I think we're agreeing a lot in terms of like, the ITC sector in general is not the big climate problem, or, it's not particularly challenging, and it is all about cleaning up the supply of electricity. I think my point is just, while we are now in this period that we have to go as fast as we can to decarbonize the electricity that we have and the ones that we're going to need when we electrify more, doing things that require more electricity, is sort of a step in the wrong direction, because also, while electrify almost everything, is the sort of, I think, a very good explanation of what we have to do as part of climate policy, many of those pathways also include the ability to reduce the amount of demand, right? So, I mean, part of electrifying is, energy efficiency, but also, when you talk about material efficiency and all these other things too. So it's not big enough to be, as I said, the make it or break it, but it's like, it still doesn't seem like a step in the right direction given where we need to go.
So if I could summarize a couple things then, because when I hear of crypto, people worry about the energy consumption first and foremost, when they talk about the negative environmental impacts. And we're saying it's definitely a step in the wrong direction, but compared to the environmental impacts from other industries, cement, steel, oil and gas, how we move people around, how we make food, it's relatively small. But then on the flip side, when I hear the crypto enthusiasts say, wow, we're creating this financial impetus for new renewable electricity to come online because we're creating the demand for new electrons, unless they're actually, like Amazon is doing or other companies, working directly with renewable energy companies and virtual PPAs, then that's a really a weak argument. There's no direct link. All they're doing is creating new demand for electricity, and that could be satisfied from any number of ways, including unmitigated gas-fired electricity.
And in this case now, even if they are doing that with renewable electricity, there is demand for that renewable electricity from other companies who want to enter into PPAs. So it's not the world that was happening, starting, really catalyzing those agreements in the same way.
To my earlier point, what is the most valuable end use of an electron?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's where this all comes back to. And so
Thought
David,
bubble again that we don't use electrons, you idiot.
Well, but tell me. I know hydrogen is not an energy producer; it's an energy carrier. Where do I have it wrong in electrons?
I'd say if you just end up accumulating a lot of electrons, I wouldn't want to be close to you.
I'm not putting them in the bank.
I'm sure Ed has some protons around to balance things out.
I think Ed's probably right.
Physicist.
Ed's a pretty balanced guy when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
But coming back to this idea of, like, is what there was some hype, and I, honestly don't even know if people are still talking about this now. I feel like I don't read the same websites that Ed reads, clearly.
Well, you should.
You don't make the same money, Ed Weeks.
That's right. 87 cents, Sarah.
I think we still haven't heard what the base investment was. I've only heard the gains.
Yeah. So $500.
Oh, okay, right.
And is now worth $500.87.
All right. Ed's buying dinner tonight.
Well, 87 cents worth.
I mean, maybe a policy outcome that I think I really don't know enough about is as some governments are clearly going to move to some variant of cryptocurrencies as part of their fiat currency, if you like. Are there ways that we could structure those new designs that aren't such energy hogs? That is, to what extent is the computational work on the blockchain necessary for validation? I think there are some reasons why it is, but my sense, uneducated sense, is you could make some choices in the system design that means you use a lot less energy. It's not fundamental to the idea that you have a distributed system that you have to use this much energy.
I can almost hear crypto enthusiasts blowing gaskets right now, because essentially you're talking about re-centralizing the means of production. Am I wrong?
I have a feeling
Mr.
we're going to get
Electron know-it-all?
a lot of hate about this episode.
Oh, man. But that's what they're worried about. And that's why they say crypto is the answer to centralized fiat currency. And so this is the part I want to understand better.
So let me just go for a second. So if centralized fiat currency is so bad, I feel like most of my life we haven't had wild business cycles like we did in the 30s or 1900. And that's because post-1930, central bankers actually learned something imperfectly and they screw it up, but they actually are kind of flattening out the business cycles. So I'd like to live in a world with depressions all the time.
No, I don't want to live in a world with depressions all the time. All I'm saying is I don't know. So what role has centralized currency and centralized banks played in wealth being very disproportionately allocated around societies? And all the social problems that we have right now.
I think these are really relatively separate axes. So this issue of money supply management has to do with one of the ways we regulate the business cycles in capitalism. And that feels to me kind of orthogonal or somewhat orthogonal from questions about how we set the policies that produce inequality.
When we talk about the role of central banks, and again, crypto enthusiasts are going to blow gaskets, as far as I can see, there's nothing to stop them from adopting the benefits that come with the blockchain as it applies to currencies. And in fact, I think that Bitcoin might be the last independent currency standing after several years. It's the one that perhaps is actually now too big to fail. Frankly, it's got too many investors, and if there were a sudden precipitous devaluation of blockchain, this is the one where you might actually have central banks rushing in to prop it up, because too many big institutional investors would be left in the lurch as a result. But there's nothing like what I think is central banks are just going to come in, they're going to take all those benefits from blockchain, and they'll be coming up with their own cryptocurrencies.
I got nothing on.
Well, because you're not a crypto investor. You're not in the game, Sarah.
I am not.
You're not in the game.
Yeah, I feel like we really don't know much about Bitcoin, but I feel like we can say something useful about the idea that there are interesting emerging, maybe this is more me, but there's interesting emerging, like that we have some deep deficits in our democracy, and there's ways that some of these distributed organizations might deal with them in ways that are relevant for climate.
Tease that out, because that's not intuitive for me.
So I can give one example, right? And then I will question it a little bit. But I mean, one example where I've heard blockchain proposed is to enable energy trading platforms for these microgrids. So basically the idea that you could create a microgrid, between neighbors, thinking about integrating renewable energy. I could then trade the renewable energy that I'm generating on my roof with a neighbor, and that trading could be underpinned with blockchain, and that would make the transactions much easier. So that's one example that I heard a lot of excitement about, even a few years ago, and I think it's still continuing as interest.
But sorry, Sarah, to interrupt you there, do you need the blockchain for that? Or is that just an old-fashioned algorithm that's AI that allows for that speed and efficiency?
So I think the benefit of the blockchain, as I understand it in that context, is that it's a way to have those transactions be secure and independently tracked and verifiable between me and whoever I'm selling that electricity to.
So it's not just the speed and efficiency. We can use AI and algorithms to do that, but it's the traceability.
Yeah.
Okay, that I get. That I get with blockchain.
And the lack of central ownership. So back to, big picture politics. We're in a highly divided world where if you think about climate, we have a series of supposed civil society organizations that take strong stands, and yet it's really unclear who they represent, which is part of the reason that none of them feel that legitimate to people. And there are interesting emerging ideas about how citizens can collaborate in a way that is more flat. Because as much as civil society organizations like big environmental groups are, on the one hand, pushing back against society for some good end, they themselves are organized around a central organization and money and power and so on. And there are, I think, interesting ideas about distributed democracy that are emerging, and some quite exciting. So there's this stuff that Virtual Taiwan and Polis did that really developed new ways to settle disputes. And I think to give people a hint of the fact, we all know that Facebook has algorithms that have ended up exacerbating disagreements in our societies, but that is not inherent to social media. It's an algorithmic choice. And you can look at how well Wikipedia works with a different set of rules to think about how different the outcomes can be. And there are ideas about how to use these distributed ledger-like systems, including distributed contract-like systems for voting, that allow individual citizens to participate where nobody is the boss, to participate in debates, which could develop a kind of legitimacy that our democracies are not doing a very good job of having, especially not in a global
Sounds
world.
plausible.
Yeah.
I don't understand
Fair enough. Okay.
how in the NGO world that would work, but I'm really keen to better understand it.
Fair enough.
And that's about all I can say.
Yeah. Okay.
So I do have a comment on it, though, because I think that when it comes to anything that's integrated to the system that we have today, it's not sufficient, right? And there are still barriers that are not about the transaction. So if I go back to my microgrid example, even if I want to use blockchain to sell you, my neighbor, my excess solar, as long as I'm still connected to the grid in Alberta, there's all kinds of rules about, what I can and can't do. And so those are going to sort of getting through those barriers are, in my mind, a harder problem than dealing with how we're going to track the transactions.
100% agreement. To be clear, in Alberta, we have a good monetary system. And if you send me $10, I am highly confident I'll get the $10. The issue is, did you give me the object for the $10? If you're trading electricity, that's in the electricity trading system, which I want to be regulated. Mm-hmm. So I think the blockchain adds nothing.
Okay. Because that's one, so I think it's about can you find those places that are sufficiently disconnected from existing systems where blockchain can then help? And maybe you can. I just don't know.
So to me, the interesting one are distributed social systems or systems about voting where you have organizations that don't have, that allow citizens to participate in a way that ties to their identity, but that doesn't have somebody in central control.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
But how is that different from social media? No one is centrally controlling social media.
I think one way to think about it is a form of central. I think the idea is these are kinds of social media. So the software Polis that was used by Virtual Taiwan calls itself a specific kind of social media. The issue is a social media that's been designed to allow diverse, complicated publics to see what the range of views is and see what some of the agreements are, which facilitates negotiation.
So essentially Google or Facebook stripping out the algorithms and allowing people to use something, social media, in a way that doesn't produce biased responses based on their preferences.
Yeah, but using it, I think you wouldn't want Google or Facebook to be running it, which are really big for-profit companies with strong interests. And I think the idea is building software like this that can be used to allow groups of citizens to come to coherent views. And if those groups of citizens are sufficiently diverse and can show they are, those views ought to carry real weight. So if you think about climate policy in Canada right now, we have a bunch of civil society organizations, some funded by the oil patch, some funded by liberal donors who give money to NGOs. Each of them, it's very unclear who they really represent. And so they all shout in the media, but people in the middle are left really not knowing what's legitimate, because we don't actually have a way for the Canadian citizens in a truly kind of randomly selected way to actually have structured arguments and come to conclusions. If we did, I think it could have a really profound impact on public policy, as has happened in some places.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm open to that idea. You've explained it. It's still not intuitive to me in terms of how it's going to improve upon existing voting systems that we have or a Twitter poll. But I'm open to the idea it could be an improvement.
So with voting, we only get to vote for we only get a single vote every 4 years, and we can't divide by topics. So we don't get to vote separately on gay marriage and carbon taxes and regulation of GMOs. And that's because the system was designed in a world before we had these communications, but it's not obvious that that's the right way to run a modern democracy.
But in Alberta, I just voted on daylight savings time, whether to keep it or not, in a referendum. So that, this is what I say. So we have referenda all the time. And they're well run, and Albertans come in. It happened to be tied to municipal election. We had a number of questions on there. Again, I'm not sure the blockchain, its improvement on governments just running more referenda.
In a government referenda, the government sets the question, and there's no way to have a more open debate first about what the range of views are. I think there's some evidence that actually, and maybe this is just naive optimism, but if you allow people to express their views with a structure that tends to get people to look for agreements, you can do a lot better than our current governments are doing. So, okay. Sarah, how the heck do you put this all together? Are you going to invest your money in crypto? What does this all mean?
So I think I'm staying out of crypto, not only because of the environmental impacts, but just because I don't have that appetite for risk. Maybe Ed will still convince me otherwise. But I think I'm not much changed on this view of, at the end of the day, if what we're trying to do to our economy overall is electrify a lot of stuff and clean up our electricity grid, then moving into crypto in a big way in Alberta, in particular, I think is the wrong direction to be going.
I think I went going in thinking the environmental downsides associated with crypto are quite significant. And when we put it relative to other industries, I think maybe it's pretty small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. To your point, Sarah, in spite of that, producing a bunch of electrons to power crypto mining operations isn't probably the best use of those electrons that we're producing. I think we could be using them in a bunch of different ways. To our discussion about just the blockchain, I can understand at the kind of the basic level in terms of secure transactions. I think some of the benefits of the blockchain. I'd like to know more about what you were saying, David, around how the blockchain could actually enhance public discussion, debate, policy, and democracies. I don't quite get it yet, but I'm really open to better understanding it.
I think my big conclusion here is that none of us understand this very well, probably least of all me. I think it's pretty clear that none of us think it's good for Alberta to go into big-time Bitcoin mining. But I also think there's some clearly set of new ideas here around distributed organizations. The idea of Bitcoin distributed currency, but there's other ideas for distributed organizations, some which might end up being important to politics around climate. Why do I say that? Because the central challenge for climate is this global public good, where individual governments almost by definition can never get enough of it inside their scope to really make sense. And we don't have effective global government. Do I think that Bitcoin mining is going to magically solve global government? No. But do I think there might be some things that come out of the ways to have secure agreements between citizens with no central control that could be useful? Yeah, I'm slightly optimistic.
We'd love to hear from EVC listeners on this one. I think that we've probably put our feet in our mouths multiple times, and we have shown our ignorance. We know a bit. maybe we're representative of the average person out there in terms of their understanding that something is new, that's still very new and fuzzy. So, dear listener, help us to understand it better. You can contact us at info@energyversusclimate.com. Subscribe, rate us, tweet us, love us.
And of course, send us donations in Bitcoin, but we'd really prefer it in full single unit Bitcoins.
Absolutely. And I will take those Bitcoins and move them into EBC's cold wallet. And I sort of understand what that is.
Hopefully our listeners don't feel discouraged by our management of money and stop giving us donations.
Leave that in, Eva. Leave that in.
Are you cashing out your $500.87, Ed?
I tell you what, as I said, 87 cents worth of tonight's dinner is on me. Thanks for listening to Energy versus Climate. The show is created by David Keith, Sarah Hastings-Simon, and me, Ed Whittingham, and produced by Eva Voinijescu. Mika McFarlane, Crystal Hickey, and Christina Pearson provide webinar support. Our title and show music is The Wind-Up by Brian Lips. Sign up for updates and exclusive webinar access at energyversusclimate.com. Interact with us live every other week and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen.